Good Lord, ride all the way.
A 10,
9,
8,
7,
6,
5,
4,
3,
2.
1. Hello and welcome to a very special broadcast here at Slooh as we take this opportunity to point our telescopes at a rarely photographed phase of the moon, the new moon. We'll talk about these images in a sec. Really, this is more of a nearly new moon. It's a 3-day-old waxing crescent moon, slowly making its way out from the glare of the sun. Now, photographing a truly brand new moon would be close to impossible to capture in our telescopes, although we have done it, and we'll explain that a little bit later on. I'm here at Slooh's flagship observatory in the Canary Islands. I'm actually in our Dome 3. We've got 3 domes here. It's 100 degrees, just a little off 100 degrees in here, a little bit hot. We are 8,000 feet above sea level on top of a huge volcano. It's home to some of the world's biggest and best telescopes, including those that Slooh members control every night. Now, one of those telescopes we've used to photograph this incredibly young moon, and we're doing so in daylight actually today, is one of the telescopes that Slooh members are using every night. It's our half-meter telescope. We'll talk a little bit more about how we've done this later, as well as explain those stranger starfish shapes you'll see on the images. But let's take a step back for a second. Why are we looking at the new moon today? It's not just because it's an interesting phase of the moon to observe for astronomers. As we've explored in previous shows, the moon and its phases are important to different cultures and religions around the world. Each month, we explore the importance of the full moon to Native American cultures with our partners actually over at the Old Farmer's Almanac. We've also discuss the importance of the sun to various cultures in terms of marking time, creating calendars, and celebrating important feast days and holidays. But today, we really want to explore the role the new moon plays in one of the oldest and most widely practiced faiths in the world, Islam. Islam, like several other faiths, follows a lunar calendar. Each of their months begins with the sighting of a new moon, much like the one that we're looking at right now from the half-meter telescope. Now, a little later on in our broadcast, I'll be joined by Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya of the Al Maghreb Institute in Seattle, and he's going to help us explain, help us understand exactly what role the moon plays in Muslim beliefs, and how the practice of moon sighting works in this modern world when we've got telescopes and other optical aids. Now, if you've got any questions for me or our esteemed guests this afternoon, just send them to @Slooh on Twitter, or you can use the Slooh chat box if you're watching the show on our live channel at slooh.com. But right now, let's get to know a little bit more about this phase of the moon from an astronomical perspective. For that, we're going to turn to Slooh astronomer Bob Berman. Bob, hi, are you there?
I am, Paul. Great to be here again.
Hi, Bob. Great to see you as always. Now, normally when we're broadcasting the moon, we've been talking about the full moon with the Old Farmer's Almanac. But what are some of the most interesting things about a new moon?
Well, there's so many. I love the fact that we're getting away from full moon, at least just for the moment. Everybody is obsessed with the full moon, including, our wolvine. Is that a word? Our canine. Okay, that's better. Our canine cousins. And because it's the moon that's out all night long, it's the one everyone notices, perfectly round, on and on and on. But this phase, the new moon, as you said before, not only does it start the month for a major religion, it actually is very important in the Jewish religion as well. And you can see it weaving in and out through Buddhism and Hinduism. And but beyond that, of course, it goes back since ancient times, that it's the only phase of the moon that appears after the moon has been gone. So it's not arbitrary that we're calling it new, beginning of a cycle. Otherwise, why should anything that's recurring and constant and repetitious have a beginning or an ending? Why shouldn't we call the full moon the beginning of the month. We don't for a very, very good reason, and that is there's only one time each month when the moon vanishes for several days, when it simply cannot be seen. And that period of several days is centered on when the moon is closest to the sun in the sky. You can't see it because the sun is just too bright, and you can't see it for a second reason, and that is we're seeing the dark hemisphere of the moon. We're not seeing any part of it that's lit up. So it's a double whammy. It makes the moon invisible. Now the question is, when can we start seeing it? Our only hope is right after sunset, when twilight is still bright, when it's low down, and it could be easily obscured by some hills or mountains, and then there it is, looking very thin, like thinner than a watch spring, thinner than a hair. And there's that first sighting. And it's always been exciting. Even astronomy magazines have offered contests, have through the decades, through the centuries, when can you first spot this moon? How many hours after the astronomical moment when it's lined up with the sun? And whatever the answer is, that's the age of the moon. Nobody has seen a moon naked eye in anything less than about 14 hours, a 14-hour-old moon. With binoculars, that makes it a little easier. In practice, though, in the springtime, perhaps when the moon is up at its highest, makes its highest angle from the horizon, people can do it in 18 hours, 20 hours, 22 hours. Today, 2.5 days, almost 3 days after new moon, it's fairly fat, and so all of our viewers who are look for it when their sun sets, we'll see it probably no problem at all. I know I haven't answered your question about what makes it look different. Instead, I've answered a different question, which is how it appears in the sky, so forgive me for that.
No, not at all, Bob, because it's fascinating stuff, and that's what you bring to our shows. And it was last night. Yesterday we did our very first sunset show with our resident yogi at Slooh, and we were talking about meditation and yoga and how important the sun is to yoga. And after we watched this glorious golden sunset, I was looking out, and there it was, this incredibly young moon in the golden haze. It was incredibly low, and because we're at 8,000 feet altitude here, I actually calculated the other day when the sun was setting, it was actually at -1 degrees elevation, because we're looking lower down, you know. But it looked absolutely glorious last night. But we're looking at it here, Bob, through the half-meter telescope, and it's about time I explain to people what these starfish shapes are that we're seeing. So you can see this incredibly thin 3-day-old waxing crescent moon on the right-hand side, but the whole image is covered with this kind of starfish shape. Well, as you can see behind me, we're in daylight here. It's 7 o'clock in the evening here, local time. And we've used the half-meter telescope through a very special filter that cuts out most of the light. But we have to take such a short exposure that is actually the leaves of the shutter opening in the camera, and there's no way we can take a longer exposure to get rid of that effect. But Bob, I also said at the beginning of the show, we have actually succeeded in imaging a truly new moon here at Slooh, haven't we?
Yes, we have. Whenever the moon passes in front of the sun during an occultation, or transit of the sun, as it's properly called, then that's actually, no, we're talking about an eclipse. We're talking about an eclipse of the moon, such as the kind that you've been presenting from different parts of the world, Paul. And that's the moment of new moon when we're just looking at the absolute dark side of the moon, isn't it?
Yeah, so this is eclipses of the sun, and this is about the dynamics of, you know, the moon orbiting Earth. And you'd think then, Bob, that we'd have a solar eclipse every month, wouldn't we? Why don't we get, if the moon is orbiting, you know, the Earth once a lunar month, why doesn't it always pass in front of the sun? So why don't we always get a solar eclipse?
Well, because the moon orbits around us at a little bit of an angle, a 5-degree angle relative to our orbit around the sun. In fact, that's a very slight angle. Usually you'll get something else entirely. In fact, every other moon of every other planet orbits around the planet's equator. And if our moon behaved normally and did that, well, since we're tipped 23.5 degrees to the direction in which we go around the sun, the moon's orbit around us should also be tipped 23.5 degrees. Instead, very bizarrely, our moon ignores our tilt and orbits us in the same flat plane that the planets go around the sun. Ours is
Right.
the only major moon to do that. But nonetheless, it's not exactly the same flat plane. That little 5 degree uh, residual means that most months, as the moon is going to pass in front of the sun, it instead passes above it or below it by as much as 10 full moon widths. So it doesn't even
Wow.
just slightly miss it, it really misses
Yeah.
it on most months. So we don't get an eclipse on most months.
That's a huge amount away. Now, Bob, if people want to view a very, very young moon for themselves, what do they need to do? When do they need to look? Where do they need to look?
By the way, I love that graphic we were just showing of that
Yeah.
shadow line going across the moons. You know, it depends upon the time of the year. It's always true that to spot a young moon, you need to look right after sunset, face the direction of sunset, that is roughly the west, and the moon will be low. And a day after new moon, good luck. It's going to be extremely low and hard to see. 2 days after new moon, you ought to be able to see it. But here's where the seasons come in. At this time of year, and from now until the end of the year, it's not easy because the moon's orbit around us is taking more of a horizontal stance relative to the horizon. So when you're facing the setting sun, the moon is really kind of almost going around sideways along the horizon, just slightly tilted upward, so that although it marches the same 13 degrees away from the sun night by night by night, those 13 degrees carries it off more to the left rather than upward. But in January, February, and March, the moon's path around the sun is more vertical to the horizon. So those
Right.
same 13 degrees per night carries it almost straight above that horizon, up 13 degrees. And 2 days after new moon, it's 26 degrees up. And now it becomes much easier to see a young moon a mere one day after the new moon period. So January, February, March, that's when you, if you're really going to be a hunter of the young moon, that's when you want to look for it.
And you can do the same thing, can't you, with a very old moon? In other words, days before the new moon, but you do that
Exactly.
at dawn in the east before the sun's rising. Is that right, Bob?
Exactly. With now the rules are reversed. Now you're going to be much more readily seeing it, a much steeper, more vertical slant up from the horizon in the autumn. You'll see it much more easily now in August and especially in September and October. And it's the springtime where that becomes more difficult. This is also the phenomenon that gives us the harvest moon and changes the time that's elapsed from the moon rising one night to another. It's that angle with the horizon. But anyway, and that also changes the way the horns look. The horns are the
Yes.
points at the end of the moon. Now, in the springtime, the moon is oriented like a smile in the sky. It's the only time of the year when we can really see it like a smiling moon. Now, for most of us, by the way, in the tropics, it's pretty much a smile all the time. But I'm talking
Yeah.
about for mid-northern viewers, Japan, Europe, United States, Canada. We're going to see it as a smile in January, February, March. Now, and for the rest of the year, you'll see that new moon as a sideways, like an archer's bow.
Yeah.
And this brings up the different definitions. You and I are now using the new moon the way the religion of Islam does, as the first sighting of the returning
Yeah.
waxing crescent moon, and we call that the new moon. Astronomically, though, all astronomers around the world call the new moon something else, and that's the always invisible moment when the moon is most readily aligned with the sun, where it's the same, essentially the same right ascension as the sun. So it's directly above it or below it and can't be seen. So it's almost an opposite definition. You and I are now talking about it as the first time that it can be seen, whereas astronomers define the new moon as the most surest time when it cannot be seen every month.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but we're interested in positives, not negatives. And so, since a number of religions have followed that, and mythology and custom throughout the centuries, we're calling that new moon the same way that most people do, and that is that first sighting of that crescent. Lovely.
Yeah. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining me on our very first new moon show, the first of many, we hope. Thank you very much for your insights as ever, and we will see you, I think, for your next show on Tuesday. So
yes, it would be, but
to...
I'm having a little vacation next week. I won't be back till Thursday, but thank you. Yes, we're going to be.
We
doing
surely
that,
don't give people holiday.
Okay, bye.
Have a good time, Bob. Bye bye. That was Slooh astronomer Bob Berman. You can watch him most weeks on Tuesdays and Thursdays starting at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Now, if you are wanting to view this new moon yourself, from my experience last night, there's something else I would recommend to you, that when you first look into that kind of twilight sky, when the sky's still quite bright but the sun has set, don't just look, think, oh, I can't see it, and then walk away. Keep looking, because it can actually take some time to discern the fairly faint crescent against the background quite bright sky. It's a little bit like being dark adapted when you go out star watching at night. You have to wait for your eyes to adapt to that, and often it helps to spot things like this, especially when you're trying to spot maybe a bright planet when it's still twilight. You can see Venus at the moment. Try and focus on something distant on the horizon and then look up into the sky. Otherwise, your eyes don't really have very much to focus on. But anyway, back to the new moon. Coming up, we will be welcoming Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya from the Al Maghrib Institute. He's going to help us to understand the role of the new moon plays in the Islamic faith. And to everyone, though, now who's joining the show maybe for the first time, if you're enjoying what you're seeing and hearing, I really want to encourage you to become a member of the Slooh community. It's free to try and there's absolutely no obligation. At its core, members control our robotic telescopes, both here in the Canary Islands and in our Chile observatory, via this really simple but powerful interface to see everything that glows in space. In fact, Slooh members, we estimate, have taken over 4 million photos of over 50,000 different objects in the sky. And last night, we saw some fabulous live views of the planets Mars and Saturn from the Chile observatory. They were looking spectacular. And we were all watching that because we always say Slooh works like a jukebox. One member is in control of any of the telescopes, while all the other members get to see the telescope live, the views live. And then everybody can contribute to talking about the images, what have you. We always say it kind of feels a bit like being cavemen and women gathered around a campfire. We wonder together about the universe and share our great diversity of perspectives. It really is space for everyone here, so please do give it a try, and in the process, you'll be supporting our ability to make programs like this available to the public. And on that note, we're going to take a very quick commercial break, but when we return, we'll be welcoming Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya, who's going to be talking to us about the Muslim faith and the tradition of moon sighting. So we'll be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to Slooh, as we see this rather strange starfish image taken through our half-meter telescope here in the Canary Islands of this 3-day-old crescent moon. Looks absolutely fabulous, and I'm going to be looking at that a little bit later at dusk. I saw it last night, so I know I'm going to be able to sit there. And today, that's what we are doing. We're looking at the new moon and talking about its importance to the Islamic lunar calendar. I spoke very briefly about this earlier in the program, but let's find out from an expert about the importance of the moon to the Islamic faith and about the fascinating practice of moon sighting. To help us understand all of this, I'm very happy to welcome our special guest, Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya of the Al-Maghrib Institute in Seattle. Sheikh Abdul Bari, thank you for joining us here at Slooh this afternoon.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to join everyone at Slooh, and thank you for the opportunity.
In the first instance, can you tell us a little bit about the Al-Maghrib Institute where you're working?
Al-Maghrib Institute is an institute that works to educate Muslims, mainly in the West, but we're available in many countries. In North America, almost all the major countries, in Canada and the United States, and also in Europe, in the UK, and in Ireland, Scotland, and also in some of the Scandinavian countries. We've just started having our classes there also. Also in Asia. So.
Right. So worldwide, and but you're based in Seattle, is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I do. I live in Seattle. I've been here in Seattle almost all my life.
All right. Okay. Well, anyway, welcome. Now tell us, you're the expert here. What role does the moon play in the Islamic faith?
Well, the moon and the sun in the Islamic faith are both very, very important. They, as mentioned in the Quran, God says, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ, and they ask you concerning the crescent. Say, O Muhammad, the crescent is mawaqit linnas. It's a way to determine and calculate time, and also to calculate the times for prayer. So in Islam, both the sun and the moon actually play a very, very important role. In fact, every day we determine our prayer times. We pray 5 times a day, and so 5 times a day, our prayer times are determined by the position of the sun, meaning the shadow of when we pray. When the sun rises, that's the end of the prayer, and before that, at dawn, as soon as you see the light on the horizon, that's the beginning of the dawn prayer. And then, of course, when it's midday, when the sun is at its zenith, then that's the midday prayer. And then when the shadow is longer than the actual object itself, then of course that's our afternoon prayer. And so the sun plays a very important every single day, but also the beginning of the month, the Islamic calendar begins, which is the Hijri calendar. The Hijri means the beginning of the calendar, which is started when the migration of the Prophet Muhammad from Mecca to Medina began, and that's the beginning of the Islamic calendar. And so the beginning of each month is determined by the actual sighting of the crescent, the waxing crescent. The first sighting is the first day of the month, and of course we determine when Ramadan begins with the actual sighting of the crescent, and also the beginning of Hajj, also the beginning of Hajj, which is one of the pillars of Islam. The beginning of the month of Dhul Hijjah is also determined, of course, by the beginning, when the beginning of the month happens, and so our worship, the times of worship, and is determined by the moon, the sun, and the moon.
So on a daily and a monthly basis, I didn't realize actually there was that connection with the sun's position during the day as well. I guess all of this is born from the tradition of astrology and astronomy in the Middle East. I mean, really, the Middle East is the cradle of modern astronomy in many ways. But what is the actual practice of this moon sighting? Does it have to be done visually? Does it have to be done by somebody of the faith? And is it reported to somebody who then declares, yes, that's a bona fide sighting, and it's the start of the next month.
Well, yes, there's of course there are rulings, actual rulings, and methods and how we determine whether a sighting is acceptable or not. But I think before I get into that, I just wanted to mention that in Islam we believe that the sun and the moon are creations of God, and they are one of the biggest signs of God. And you recite the Quran, you will see it being mentioned often, many times. About the greatness of God and the greatness of the creation of God. And one of the examples is the rotation of the earth and the orbiting of the sun and the moon. And all of this is mentioned over and over again in the Quran. And so it's mentioned to let us know the greatness of God and the creation of God. But in Islam, we don't determine good luck or bad luck. We don't have what you call sometimes astrology. Well, we call astrology. I'll give an example. One time, the son of the Prophet Muhammad, his name was Ibrahim. He passed away, and on that day, it so happened there was an eclipse, and so he said. The people said, well, even the sun and the moon mourn the death of the son of the Prophet Muhammad. And so the Prophet Muhammad, he said, the sun and the moon, the occurrence of the eclipse is not a result of a person being born or a person dying. These are two signs of the greatness of God. And so when you see them, then increase in your worship and invoke God and supplicate to Him. And so the sun and the moon, of course, are very, very important actually in determining and giving us and strengthening our faith when we look at the beauty of the sun and the moon. Now I'll get to the actual some of the actual rulings related to how do we determine and whose sightings do we take. Well, in Islam, it's a very simple, simplistic religion where it's universal. It's for all those who are educated and those who are just laymen, simple people, to determine times of prayer, to determine the beginnings of the month. It's not something that you need actual, in-depth astronomical knowledge. It's just when you see the moon, the crescent, the Prophet Muhammad said, when you see it, then fast. And if you see it, then you break your fast. Meaning when you see it, that's the beginning of the month of Ramadan. And when you see also the crescent of the next month, which is the month of Shawwal, then you break your fast, and that's the Eid festival. But who is it that we take? Well, it only takes one person who sees the crescent, but that person has to be someone who is trustworthy, someone who is a Muslim and is trustworthy, because the rituals of Islam are dependent upon that person. And so if he's someone who's trustworthy, then we take his sighting, and if he comes to the judge, the people who are responsible in a Muslim government, and says, I saw such and such, I saw the crescent today. And then, of course, the judge would actually order everyone in the town, everyone in the city to fast based on his sighting. And so that's the sighting at the beginning of of Ramadan. But as for the sighting at the end of Ramadan, you need two trustworthy witnesses of the new moon in order to begin or to start the next month, which is the end of Ramadan.
Now, I know we work with the Dubai Astronomy Group in the Middle East, and we know that a group of them often go out into the desert around the time of new moon, specifically to have a clear horizon and to be able to have a new moon sighting. Now, sometimes they photograph it, and we've actually been seeing a few photographs of new moons just now, and we've got this live image from our telescope now. Are these moon sightings, the official ones, are they allowed to use any optical aids, telescopes or binoculars, or does it have to be with naked eyes?
The majority of the contemporary scholars are of the opinion that, of course, the default is observation with the naked eye. But as long as a person is able to see the actual sighting of the moon, even if it's through the usage of telescopes, then it's the majority of Muslim scholars will accept that, and it's permissible according to the majority of the scholars. But as I mentioned, the default is that during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, they didn't have any of these things, and so it's not like it's not. It's very simplistic. If you can see it, and of course, as was mentioned earlier in the show, it's not that easy. You have to be really, really experienced. You have to know where to look, and it's actually very, very difficult because it's so thin, and it takes a lot of experience. But it's a joyful time, believe it or not. It's part of our faith to actually go out and look for the new moon, especially the moon of Ramadan. The Prophet Muhammad, he used to urge his companions to go out, and they would say, we used to compete with each other in seeing who would be able to see that new moon that brings the happiness of the beginning of Ramadan. And when we see it, there's a supplication. We supplicate to God. We say, oh Allah, oh God, let this moon pass over with us with blessing and faith and safety and strong faith in Islam. And we supplicate to God when we see that also. Everything is connected to God. And when we look at the creation of God, then we see his greatness.
I mean, there's something primordial about it. It reaches inside of us, even people of no faith, you make a connection to it. We were talking yesterday with our sunset show, and then later I saw this very young moon, and it just captivates us as if there's something raw in our DNA that, this sight of a glorious new moon, this tiny thin crescent moon, it's welcoming. It's about the cycle of life and everything else, I guess. But I understand the competitive nature of it, because now I've seen a very young moon, a 2-day-old moon. I want to see whether I can spot an even younger one, visually, and then try it with binoculars and things like this. So now tell me, does this particular new moon have any particular importance in the Islamic calendar?
Yes, in fact, this particular new moon is important because the coming month, the next month is Dhul Hijjah, which is the month of Hajj, the month of the pilgrimage, the major pilgrimage in Mecca, where millions and millions of people flock to make the pilgrimage. And of course, the beginning of that month, the end of that month, and the end of the month has to be known. It's either, of course, 29 days or 30 days. And so in order for us to determine when the beginning of the next month is, which is the month of Hajj, and so to determine when the actual day of Hajj. Of course, Hajj is a pilgrimage to Mecca, but there are rituals that are done at different days. But there are certain days that you do it specifically, and also Muslims around the world, believe it or not, also fast. Those who are not making the pilgrimage, they fast on the day of Hajj, Arafah, the main day of Hajj. The Muslims fast during that day around the world. And so to determine what day to fast on that day also for Hajj, that's something that we look at the moon for this month, also determine when it's going to end. And then so we'll know whether it's 29 or 30 days. And then, of course, the beginning of the next month is what determines the beginning of Hajj. So yes, this month, and actually every month, because they're all connected, of course. But specifically this month is a little bit more important than many of the other months because of the coming ritual of pilgrimage.
Well, there is so much here. I'm so enjoying listening to all of this. So much of this is very new to me, but I find it absolutely fascinating. It's just another one of these connections, these perspectives on space and the cosmos that we love here at Slooh. Sheikh Abdul Bari, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you'll come back and tell us more about new moon sighting during what we hope is going to become a regular feature here at Slooh.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be on your show, and again, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. That was Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya of the Al Maghrib Institute. Fascinating. You know, we often talk about this diversity of perspectives and space for everyone. We've been trying to queue this show up for a very, very long time. And I'm so glad we've finally done it. You can just tell, can't you? There is so much fascinating information surrounding this new moon, this Islamic new moon and the moon sighting. We have got to carry on doing these, just as we're doing the full moons every month with the Old Farmer's Almanac. Now, don't forget, if you would like to help us in any of our future shows, especially the new moon shows, so yeah, probably if you're in the Middle East or Asia, or maybe slightly further on, the timings of that would work out really well for us to do a show. If you can provide a live image feed using a telescope or a camera with a zoom lens of that really young new crescent moon. Just email me at paul@slooh.com if you'd like to get involved with that. Now, as regular viewers know, our tagline is Space for Everyone, and it's been great today to further extend this to one of the oldest practices of humans relating to our cosmos. It's yet another perspective on space that we hope to make an absolute regular monthly feature, although it's not going to be monthly, if you understand, it's going to be lunar monthly, isn't it? So anyway, that just about wraps things up for today. I've got to get back to installing these new telescopes for Slooh members to use every night. We've had some fascinating insights as ever about the new moon from Slooh astronomer Bob Berman, and we've got a far better understanding, I certainly have, of some of the basic tenets of Islam and the role the moon plays in their faith from Sheikh Abdul Bari Yahya of the Al Maghrib Institute. What a wonderful guest he was. We'll be sure to invite him back to tell us more about this fascinating subject. We should also talk about another thing that I hinted at there, the roots of astronomy being in Arabia, in the Middle East. It's the history's there, but it's not talked about very much. We tend to kind of skip off to the 17th and 18th centuries, don't we? We forget those roots of astronomy in the Middle East. Just before we go, I want to tell you about a show we've got coming up here at Slooh on Monday, the 8th of August. We've got Slooh astronomer Eric Edelman. He's going to be hosting a show celebrating the Japanese Star Festival of Tanabata. We did that last year, but this year we're going to be doing that with our partners over at weathernews.com. And during that show, we'll tell you the story of two star-crossed lovers and their once-a-year journey across the sky. It all starts 8 p.m. Eastern on Monday. And if you haven't seen one of these shows before, you really need to. Eric has a wonderful storytelling manner. So only Eric can do this. I think Eric speaks Japanese as well, which might be rather useful. Anyway, so that's coming up on Slooh. Don't miss that. Don't forget Bob Berman on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And don't forget live views from the telescopes every night for Slooh members. Slooh members can also watch recorded archives of any of our shows as well. I'm Paul Cox. I've been at Slooh's flagship observatory here in the Canary Islands. I hope you've enjoyed this first of what we hope will be many, many new moon shows. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, so we will certainly be back to do more of these. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Goodbye for now.